when there's a defaulting contract. A lot of the agents will sometimes get confused on, what causes the default? What's the timelines? I talked about 5 p.m. So let's kind of chat more about that. What do you see as a principal broker is frequently with our agents that are causing, default in the contract?
Yeah, so there's a couple of recommendations that I have. You have the time is of the essence clause
Right.
in the real estate purchase contract,
Which means
5 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. And you think that would be easy to remember, and
it does come up frequently.
yeah, but it comes up quite often, even with our experienced agents.
Mm-hmm.
I recently spoke with an agent, I won't name that particular individual, who said, well, I've got till midnight, right? No, you don't. You only have till 5 p.m. The contract specifically states Mountain Standard Time, and that's important because some clients are out of state. Sometimes they're East Coast or West Coast, and they may not be aware that if they're going to take action, if they're up against a deadline and there's a risk of losing that earnest money,
5 p.m. in California would be a little late here in Utah.
Well, yeah, exactly. You have to move pretty quickly, and the best thing to do is don't get up against a deadline.
Right.
If you're up against a deadline, you should be renegotiating the contract way in advance so that you don't risk the earnest money.
It's funny because I actually set alerts on my calendar 48 hours before each deadline. It says, reach out to your client and make sure everything is good because, as agents too, like you'll be busy and then you'll get these phone calls, you're showing properties and you get back home and then you forget about a bunch of stuff. You need to be able to give yourself some wiggle room, and that's super important. Yeah. So 5 p.m.
Yes.
Always Mountain Standard Time.
Yep.
No questions after
Exactly. That. Tips and tricks to help agents. Okay. Now, this is something that is not widely known. And if agents were to do this on their contracts, it would save them some potential heartache. Okay. The settlement deadline also means that you have to settle by 5 p.m. on the settlement deadline.
Right.
On or before.
On or
right?
before. Correct.
Okay. Now think about it. How often, when you go to close, when do you usually close?
Well, I try to close first thing in the morning, but sometimes you close in the evening.
And why is that?
Because of the availability of your clients.
Exactly. They're usually working 9 to 5, right? 9 to 5.
Right.
So you are already in default of your contract
if you don't close.
If you are settling after 5 p.m.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Right.
Now, a lot of agents don't think about that. They're just thinking, oh, my settlement deadline's today. I have to settle.
Right.
So when we run into issues with earnest money disputes, I will oftentimes ask the escrow officer, the closing agent, the timestamp of when they came in to actually sign.
Mm.
And if I can get proof that it was after 5 p.m., I've got a reason for default, you
Right.
know? So I'm starting to write into my contracts when I represent a buyer that all deadlines will follow the time is of the essence clause, except settlement. I will actually push that to 9 p.m. just in case, just to give some leeway.
Give you some room. But you can make any adjustments to the contract. You just need to make sure it's in there and that you're following on all those dates and what the changes are. We talked about settlement, but that can also go into possession of the property, right? This is another topic where you get to the closing table and it's like, all right, well, I'm ready to move in. And sometimes we're like, well, let me check the contract. How much time do you have? And there's some options on whether it's calendar days or a certain time frame. So is it still 5 p.m.? Because you can put how many hours? 48 hours.
Mm-hmm.
So then that is dependent on what happens.
Yeah.
Can you give us a breakdown on what that looks like?
So what typically occurs is the majority of properties when they're purchased, they are acquired using a mortgage.
Mm-hmm.
Most people need financing.
Right.
And if you look at the mortgage industry, by the time that somebody settles, so settlement, this is the way I try to explain it to clients as well as agents who are learning the process. Settlement is when you go in to sign on the dotted line that you want to buy this property. Okay. And you're usually, if you're getting a mortgage and you're the buyer, you are filling out all of those loan docs. Well, those loan docs get sent back to the lender for final approval.
Right.
They make sure that everything's been signed. And in order to get possession, so the standard language of the real estate purchase contract is that possession is upon closing.
funding and recording.
Yes.
Yes.
And that exactly. So that is the definition of closing,
Right.
which is funding and recording. So funding being that the seller has received their funds, usually from the lender, and recording being that it's gone to the county recorder's office and the county has now recorded that you are the new owner.
Right.
So when those two things occur, you can take possession.
If you checked the box that says upon funding and recording.
Yep.
But then we have the two other boxes.
Yeah.
You got calendar days, and you can pick, and you also have hours.
Yeah. So let me finish this one thought. The way that the standard language is written is I usually encourage agents or my clients to try to settle no later than a Thursday during the week, because it takes about 24 hours for a lender to view the docs and approve. If you're wanting to move in that weekend, you don't want to close any later than that Thursday so that everything can be approved, funded, and recorded by Friday.
Right.
So you can take possession that Friday and start moving in. Okay. And you'll see a lot of agents make the mistake of, well, I decided to settle on a Friday, and then it doesn't fund and record until Monday.
And then the clients aren't happy because they wanted to move in over the weekend.
Yeah, and they've reserved their U-Haul truck, or
right.
you know, so they're not happy with that. But to your question of the other boxes, yeah, I mean, that's usually to the advantage of the seller. So if the seller knows that they have a lot of furniture that they have to move out, they may request to have 48 hours or 3 calendar days after closing. And that's important as a buyer's agent to inform your client, hey, the seller has requested these extra days to have more time to move.
And they should know well in advance, because whether you're representing the seller or the buyer, moving trucks, and then if they're like, oh, I already planned moving truck, it's hard to get movers. And then if they have a rental and they're like, I'm going to be out on this date, and now they have nowhere to live, it's really important that they know early on what those dates are.
Yep. Now back to the whole thing of funding and recording. If you've got a cash offer and you're not relying on a mortgage to acquire a property, you can put the settlement deadline on a Friday,
right,
and have it fund and record that same day. And then you do still have table closing. And table closings are where a mortgage company will send the funds the same day,
right, and
you can fund and record that same day.
Right. So then, for clarification for the agents, if they're saying, well, a lot of cases I need to get some more time for allow the sellers to move out. So if they're saying, well, what's the difference between 2 calendar days and 48 hours? So when does the time start for the 48 hours?
Technically, it would be after both parties have signed.
Okay, so when both parties have signed.
Yes.
Okay.
And then it would be contingent on the last party signing if you're going off of hours.
So you see how this can get confusing?
Yes.
And agents, and so in my mind, it's probably not the best to put hours.
Yes.
Because you have to verify with both parties when that was, and it becomes a logistical nightmare, because then you're just talking to the other broker or the other realtor, and you're talking to title. Well, when did they close? And you're waiting for all these people to tell you, okay, the last person closed in this time frame. That means it's going to be this time frame to move in. It could be a nightmare. So if they go off of calendar days, then if they close at 4 p.m. on, let's say, Thursday, and they put 2 calendar days, what does that then become?
It should be 4 p.m. 2 days after.
2 days after.
Yep.
So the current day is not counted. It's saying from this point on, because sometimes agents think, well, I'm going to count today.
Yeah.
So it'd be 2 additional days. So Thursday, Friday, Saturday at 4 p.m.
So if you were to settle on a Friday and you put 2 calendar days, it would be Friday to Saturday, Saturday to Sunday.
Okay. So
Sunday would be your Friday possession.
So it's So to make it easy for the agents to understand, it's the 2 following days.
Yes.
Not counting the day that you closed.
Yep.
Okay. And that helps make it clear for the agents on when possession is.
Yes.
Now to make it all clear, it should be easy to understand in writing what that will look like in an addendum as well.
Yeah.
And verifying. And I've done that a few times, just sending an extra addendum in and saying, hey, possession will be on this date at this time.
So going back to another tips and tricks. Ready? Yeah. You brought up the issue of hours after closing or calendar days after closing. I would highly recommend that if you're not going to follow the standard language in the contract, which is, possession shall be closing, which is funding and recording.
Right.
That's what we have established. I would put an actual hour of the day. If you're going to push it out, say noon on Monday.
Right.
Possession shall be noon on Monday. That way there's no dispute. You're not arguing over hours. You can know that you're moving in at noon on Monday. That's when you're going to get the keys.
And just as you like represent like a buyer's agent, the seller's agent is busy and find lots of things. And so if everybody just knows and it's crystal clear, because maybe the seller's agent forgot to look at the contract and it's like, oh shoot, now I got to go with my clients. And then they're like, oh, well, I thought it was this. And then now they're trying to figure something out. And then you didn't tell your client. Just putting it in an addendum helps everyone. It's like, this is the time frame that it will be closed.
Absolutely.
And possession will happen.